Ah, there you are. Pull up a chair by the fireside. I'm going to tell you a story, but it's not for the faint of heart. My name is Julia Norton, and you're listening to Dark and Twisty Tales, a weekly telling of the lesser-known and more grisly folk stories and fairy tales. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I shall begin. The Juniper Tree. 2,000 years ago, or a very long time anyway, there lived a rich man and his good and beautiful wife. They loved each other dearly. There was only one thing needed to complete their happiness, and that was children. But as much as they longed for a child, and as much as the woman prayed both day and night, no child came, and no child came. Now, in front of their house was a courtyard where there grew a juniper tree. One winter's day the woman stood under the tree peeling an apple, and as she did so she cut her finger, and a drop of blood fell into the snow. "Oh," she sighed, "if only I had a child as red as blood and as white as snow." And as she said that, her heart lifted, and she felt happy. She went back into the house, feeling sure everything would end well. 1 month went by, and the snow vanished. 2 months went by, and the world turned green. 3 months went by, and flowers bloomed out of the earth. 4 months went by, and all the twigs on all the trees in the forest grew stronger and pressed themselves together, and the birds sang so loud that the woods resounded, and the blossom fell from the trees. 5 months went by, and the woman stood under the juniper tree. It smelled so sweet that her heart leapt in her breast, and she fell to her knees with joy. 6 months went by, and the fruit grew firm and heavy, and the woman fell still. When 7 months had gone by, she plucked the juniper berries and ate so many that she felt sick and sorrowful. After the 8th month had gone, she called her husband and said to him, weeping, "If I die, bury me under the juniper tree." She felt comforted by his promise, and then 1 more month went by, and she had a child as red as blood and as white as snow. When she saw the baby, her heart could not contain her joy, and she died. Her husband buried her under the juniper tree, weeping bitterly. After a little time, his first anguish ebbed away, and although he still wept, it was less bitterly than before. And after a little more time had gone by, he took a second wife. He had a daughter by the second wife, but his first wife's child, as red as blood and as white as snow, was a son. The second wife loved her daughter, but whenever she looked at the little boy, she felt her heart twist with hatred, because she knew he would inherit her husband's wealth, and she feared her daughter would get nothing. Seeing this, the devil got into her and let her think of nothing else. And from then on she never left the little boy alone. She slapped him and cuffed him. She shouted at him and made him stand in the corner until the poor child was so afraid he hardly dared come home from school, for there was nowhere else he could find any peace. One day the woman had gone into the pantry when her little daughter Marlenkin came in after her and said, "Mama, can I have an apple?" "Of course, my dear," said the woman, and gave her a fine red apple from the chest. The chest had a heavy lid with a sharp iron lock. "Mama, can my brother have one too?" said Marlenkin. Mention of the little boy made the woman angry, but she contained herself and said, "Yes, of course, when he comes home from school." Just then she happened to look out of the window and saw the little boy coming home. And it was as if the devil himself entered her head, because she seized the apple from the little girl and said, "You're not going to have one before your brother." And she threw the apple into the chest and shut it, and Marlenkin went up to her room. Then the little boy came in, and the devil made the woman say sweetly, "My son, would you like an apple?" But her eyes were fierce. "Mamma," said the little boy, "you look so angry. Yes, I'd like an apple." She couldn't stop. She had to go on. "Come with me," she said, opening the lid of the chest. "Choose an apple for yourself. Lean right in. That's it. The best ones are at the back." And while the boy was leaning in, the evil one nudged her, and bam! She slammed down the lid, and his head fell off and rolled in among the apples. Then she felt horribly afraid, and she thought, "What can I do? But maybe there's a way." And she ran upstairs to her chest of drawers and took a white scarf, and then she sat the little boy in a chair near the kitchen door and set his head on his neck again and tied the scarf around it so nothing could be seen. Then she put an apple in his hand and went into the kitchen to put some water on the stove to boil. And Marlenkin came into the kitchen and said, "Mamma, Brother is sitting by the door and he's got an apple in his hand, and his face is so white. I asked him to give me the apple, but he didn't answer, and I was frightened." "Well, you go back out there and speak to him again," said the mother. "And if he won't answer you this time, smack his face." So Marlenkin went to the little boy and said, "Brother, give me the apple." But he sat there still and said nothing. So she smacked his face, and his head fell off. Poor Marlenkin was terrified. She screamed and ran to her mother and cried, oh, mother, I've knocked my brother's head off." She sobbed and cried, and nothing would comfort her. "Oh, Marlenkin, you bad girl," said her mother. "What have you done? But be quiet, hush, don't say a word about it. It can't be helped. We won't tell anyone. We'll put him in the stew." So she took the little boy and chopped him into pieces and put them in the pot. Marlenkin couldn't stop crying. In fact, so many tears fell in the water that there was no need for salt. Presently the father came home and sat down at the table. He looked around and said, "Where's my little boy?" The woman put a large dish of stew on the table. Marlenkin was crying and crying helplessly. The father said again, "Where's my son? Why isn't he here at the table?" "Oh," said the woman, "he's gone away to visit his mother's great-uncle's family. He's going to stay with them for a while." "But why? He didn't even say goodbye." "He wanted to go. He says he was going to stay for 6 weeks, so don't worry, they'll look after him." "Well, I'm upset about that," said the father. "He shouldn't have gone like that without asking me. I'm sorry he's not here. He should have said goodbye." And he began to eat. And he said, "Marlenkin, dear, why are you crying? Your brother will come back, don't worry." And he ate more stew, and then he said, "Wife, this is the best stew I've ever tasted. It's delicious. Give me some more." "You two aren't having any. I've got a feeling that this is all for me." And he ate the whole dish, every scrap, and threw the bones under the table. Marlenkin went to her chest of drawers and took out her best silk scarf. Then she gathered up all the bones from under the table, tied them up in the scarf, and took them outside. Her poor eyes had wept so much they had no tears left, and she could only cry blood. She laid the bones down on the green grass under the juniper tree, and as she did so, she felt her heart lighten, and she stopped crying. And then the juniper tree began to move. First the branches moved apart, and then they moved together again, like someone clapping their hands. As that happened, a golden mist gathered among the branches and then rose up like a flame, and at the heart of the flame there was a beautiful bird that flew high into the air, singing and chirping merrily. And when the bird was gone, the juniper tree was just as it had been before, but the scarf and the bones had vanished. Marlenkin felt happy again, just as happy as if her brother was still alive, and she ran into the house and sat down to eat her supper. Meanwhile, the bird was flying far away. He flew to a town and settled on the roof of a goldsmith's house and began to sing. My mother cut my head off, my father swallowed me. My sister buried all my bones under the juniper tree. Cue it, you'll never find a prettier bird than me. Inside his workshop, the goldsmith was making a golden chain. He heard the bird singing overhead and thought how lovely it sounded. So he stood up to run outside and see what sort of bird it was. He left the house in such a hurry, one of his slippers fell off on the way, and he stood in the middle of the street in his leather apron and one slipper, with his pincers in one hand and the golden chain in the other. And he looked up to see the bird and shaded his eyes from the bright sun and called out, "Hey, bird! That's a lovely song you're singing. Sing it again for me." "Oh, no," said the bird. "I don't sing twice for nothing. Give me that golden chain and I'll sing it again for you." "Here you are, and welcome," said the goldsmith. "Come take it, but do sing that song again." The bird flew down and took the golden chain in his right claw and perched on the garden fence and sang, My mother cut my head off, my father swallowed me, my sister buried all my bones under the juniper tree. Cue it, you'll never find a prettier bird than me. And the bird flew away and found a shoemaker's house, and he perched on the roof and sang, My mother cut my head off, my father swallowed me, my sister buried all my bones under the juniper tree. Cue it, you'll never find a prettier bird than me. The shoemaker was tapping away at his last, but the hammer fell still as he heard the song, and he ran out of doors and looked up at the roof. He had to shade his eyes because the sun was so bright. "Bird," he called out, "you're a wonderful singer. I've never heard a song like that." He ran back inside and called, "Wife, come out and listen to this bird. He's a marvel." He called his daughter and her children and his apprentices and the maid, and they all came out onto the street and gazed up in amazement. The bird's red and green feathers were shining, and the golden feathers of his neck were dazzling in the sunlight, and his eyes sparkled like stars. "Bird," the shoemaker called up, "sing that song again." "Oh, no," said the bird, "I don't sing twice for nothing. Give me those red slippers I can see on your bench." The wife ran into the shop and brought out the slippers, and the bird flew down and seized them in his left claw. Then he flew around their heads singing, My mother cut my head off, my father swallowed me, my sister buried all my bones under the juniper tree. Cue it, you'll never find a prettier bird than me. Then he flew away out of the town and along the river, and in his right claw he had the golden chain, and in his left he had the slippers. He flew and he flew till he came to a mill, and the mill wheel was going clippity-clap, clippity-clap, clippity-clap. Outside the mill, 20 apprentices were sitting down chiselling a new millstone. Hick-hack, hick-hack, hick-hack. And the mill went clippity-clap, clippity-clap, clippity-clap. The bird flew round and perched on a linden tree that stood in front of the mill and began to sing. My mother cut my head off. And one of the apprentices stopped working and looked up. My father swallowed me. 2 more stopped working and listened. My sister buried all my bones. 4 of them stopped. Under the juniper tree. And 8 put their chisels down. Cue it, you'll never find. And now 4 more looked all around. A prettier bird than me. Finally, the last apprentice heard and dropped his chisel, and then all 20 burst into cheers and clapped and threw their hats in the air. "Bird!" cried the last apprentice. "That's the best song I've ever heard, but I only heard the last line. Sing it again for me." "Oh no," said the bird, "I don't sing twice for nothing. Give me that millstone you're all working on, and I'll sing you the song again." "Well, if it only belonged to me, you could have it like a shot," he said, "but—" "Oh, come on," said the others. "If he sings again, he can have it, and welcome." So the 20 apprentices took a long beam and laid the end under the edge of the millstone and heaved it up. Heave up, heave up, heave up. The bird flew down and put his head through the hole in the middle, and wearing it like a collar, he flew back up to the tree and sang again. My mother cut my head off, my father swallowed me, my sister buried all my bones under the juniper tree. Cue it, you'll never find a prettier bird than me. When he'd finished the song, he spread his wings and flew up in the air. In his right claw he had the golden chain, in his left claw he had the shoes, and around his neck was the millstone. He flew and he flew all the way back to his father's house. Inside the house, Father and Mother and Marlenken were sitting at the table. Father said, "You know, I feel happy for some reason. I feel better than I've done for days." "It's all very well for you," said the wife. "I don't feel well at all. I feel as if a bad storm were coming." And as for Marlenken, she just sat and wept. At that moment the bird arrived. He flew around the house and settled on the roof. And as he did that, Father said, "No, I don't think I've ever felt so well. The sun's shining outside and I feel as if I'm going to see an old friend." "Well, I feel terrible," said the woman. "I don't know what's the matter with me. I feel all cold and hot all over. My teeth are chattering and my veins are filled with fire." She tore open her bodice with trembling hands. Marlenken sat in the corner, weeping and weeping so much that her handkerchief was soaked right through. Then the bird left the roof and flew to the juniper tree, where they could all see him, and he sang, "My mother cut my head off." The mother pressed her hands over her ears and squeezed her eyes tight shut. There was a roaring in her head, and behind her eyelids lightning burned and flashed. "My father swallowed me." "Wife, look at this," cried the man. "You've never seen such a lovely bird. He's singing like an angel, and the sun's shining so warmly, and the air smells like cinnamon." "My sister buried all my bones." Marlenken laid her head on her knees, sobbing and crying. But the father said, "I'm going out. I've got to see this bird close to." "No, don't go," cried the wife. "I feel as if the whole house is shaking and burning." But the father ran out into the sunshine and gazed up at the bird as he sang, "Under the juniper tree, cue it, you'll never find a prettier bird than me." As he sang the last note, he dropped the golden chain, and it fell around the father's neck and fitted him as if it was made for him. The father ran in at once and said, "What a beautiful bird, and see what he's given me. Look!" The woman was too terrified to look. She fell down on the floor, and her cap fell off her head and rolled away into the corner. Then the bird sang once more, "My mother cut my head off." No, I can't bear it. I wish I were 1,000 feet under the ground so I wouldn't have to hear that song. My father swallowed me. And the wife fell down again as if she'd been stunned, and her fingernails were scratching at the floor. My sister buried all my bones. And Marlenkin wiped her eyes and got up. I'll go and see if the bird will give me something, she said, and ran outside. Under the juniper tree. As he said that, the bird threw down the little red shoes. Cue it, you'll never find a prettier bird than me. Marlenkin put on the shoes and found they fitted her perfectly. She was delighted, and she danced and skipped into the house and said, Oh, what a beautiful bird! I was so sad when I went out, and see what he's given me, Mama! See these lovely shoes! No, no, cried the woman. She jumped to her feet, and her hair stood out all round her head like flames of fire. I can't stand any more. I feel as if the whole world will come into an end. I can't stand it. And she ran out of the door and onto the grass, and bam! The bird dropped the millstone on her head, and she was crushed to death. The father and Marlenkin heard the crash and ran out. Smoke and flames and fire were rising from the spot, and then came a breath of wind and cleared them all away. And when they were gone, there was little brother standing there. And he took his father by one hand, and Marlenkin by the other, and all three of them were very happy. And so they went inside their house and sat down at the table and ate their supper. Cue it, you'll never find a prettier bird than me. Thank you for listening to Dark and Twisty Tales. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe on iTunes, rate, review, and share with all your friends. You can also get more information about me, Julia Norton, at julianorton.com. So, until the next time, bye. Bye.